Hello and welcome back to ReverieTrueCrime. Today I have a special guest with me and I will let him introduce himself.
Hi, my name is Kevin and I'm the host of the Jury Room Podcast. The Jury Room Podcast is a solo host narrative-based true crime podcast. I cover serial killers, missing person cases, unsolved mysteries, and a little bit of everything in between. I release episodes every week. I cover the case and then I bring a guest on for the next episode and we discuss the case before.
Yeah, Kevin has a very great show. I highly recommend it, and please go check out the Jury Room. So I definitely wanted to bring you on today because you are one of my best friends who I trust to have this kind of conversation with that will be involved in this case. I know when you do your aftermath episodes, you always bring compassion, an open mind, your perspective, and you just do it all so respectively. So I'm interested in getting your thoughts throughout this case to see if we agree or respectfully disagree on some of these things.
I'm down. Let's do it.
Okay, you ready?
Let's go.
Sharon Rita Denberg was born on September 20th, 1961, to Mr. and Mrs. Abraham J. Denberg. She grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, and she was the oldest of the Denberg children. Her parents were Orthodox Jews, and her father was a cantor at the synagogue, leading people to pray and sing. In school, Sharon participated in sports, and she was in the school choir. Her former classmates remember her as someone who was, quote, as normal as you can get. In 1979, Sharon graduated from Pikesville High School. In 1991, she went on to marry Victor Lopatka. Her parents did not support this marriage at all, and a lot of this was her kind of rebelling against them and breaking away. She and Victor moved to Hampstead, Maryland in the early 90s. Around 1995 or 96, the internet was now a huge deal. And a lot of us were waiting on the dial-up connection, tying up the landline, and Sharon decided to start taking advantage of how so many people were browsing the internet in its early stages. She was in her mid-30s by this point, advertising online about her many businesses trying to make a little extra cash. House of Dion was the name of her first website, and this one was for selling home decor guides by mail for $7. One of her ads said, quote, home decorating secrets seen in the posh homes from New England states to the Hollywood homes can now be yours. Never published before. Quick, easy ways to decorate your home. So she was making $50 per ad for her business called Classified Concepts. Sharon had multiple websites offering psychic readings, love potions, and she would make money by selling other services with 1-900 numbers.
Like a sex line, basically.
Yeah. So those were her innocent little ventures, but she also had another side hustle, which was promoting porn content. And I'm not just talking about the vanilla kind of porn or even little kinks that a lot of us could at least come to understand. This was the type where women were portrayed as being drugged, passed out, and basically raped.
So consensual, non-consensual, basically.
Yes. There were portrayals of women being hypnotized and even chloroformed while or before sexual acts. Sharon promoted these things under the alias Nancy Carlson. She was also selling her panties that she had worn with ads like, is there anyone out there interested in buying my worn panties? So I have no idea if these websites are still active. I didn't bother to go look, but there are two that she frequented called fetishfeet.com and sexbondage.com. Now, while some of us were playing Yahoo Pool, playing around in AOL chat rooms and Messenger, Sharon was on these two websites hanging out and chatting in the chat rooms under fake names. So, the fetishes on these websites varied from bondage, sadomasochism, and necrophilia.
Why is it always necrophilia? I don't
Yeah, I
understand.
don't get that. I can understand so many kinks, but when it comes to necrophilia, it's a little much. Well, as far as fetishes, I mean, if you're just thinking about necrophilia, are any fetishes going too far when it comes to fantasizing? Or is it when you act it out that it becomes too far?
I mean, I'm not one to kink shame people, but there are certain fantasies that you need to seek help for, and I think necrophilia is one of them. Bestiality is another one, and pedophilia is definitely the top three that fantasies mean that you have a deeper, dark-seated, more issues.
I agree.
But anything other than that, I feel is something that is okay to at least fantasize about. But yeah, those top three are not something you should be fantasizing about.
Well, her desires went even further when she corresponded with many people with over 50 messages that were found expressing that she wanted to be tortured to death. So, what are your thoughts on people going into chat rooms and saying, this is what I want?
I don't know. It's one of those things that some people just... I think people use... Some people, not all people, some people use torture and this kind of, bondage and stuff like that to take their power back. So I think it's one of those things that she could have been using it because there was past trauma in her life that maybe makes her already feel like she wants to die. So if she can control the situation and choose when she dies, I think that's probably what comes down to why she was looking for something like that.
That's so grim. That's very grim to think about.
I mean, it is, but the reality is that she's probably already living in a hell of torture anyways, right? So maybe...
There's got to be something more going on that I couldn't find in any of my research, like about her childhood or a lot about her marriage. So something had to be going on with her.
Right. Maybe she was abused in the church or, had an uncle or something that, abused her for a while. And, so she already lives in a place in her head that feels like she's out of control. And so going online and finding like-minded people who are willing to partake in something as extreme as killing her is her way of, taking her power back.
Yeah.
So, under the name Nancy Carlson, she depicted herself as a 300-pound porn actress who was a disciplinarian dominatrix. Sex workers' right activist, a woman named Tanith, tried to stop Sharon from sending these type of messages about being tortured and punished to death. It was shocking to Tanith, and she was not here for that kind of behavior at all. And Sharon responded to Tanith by saying, quote, "I want the real thing. I didn't ask you to preach to me."
Did you see any pictures of her? Was she actually like 300 pounds?
Probably.
So she was a big woman then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
No, I was kind of thinking that why she would pose as, a heavyset woman, but if that makes sense, that she actually was. So she was kind of just disguising her because remember, folks, this was back in the 90s before... I don't want to say we've gone through a sexual revolution because sexuality is still not something that's talked about as much as it should be, but it's definitely more accepted, the kinkier side of people, because the reality is that we all have something that's, we all have our preferences, whether it's quote unquote kinky or not. We all have our preferences, and this was in a day and age where if you like to get your ass kicked, I mean, that really wasn't something you talked about,
Yeah. That's very true. Many men would stop communicating with Sharon when she expressed those thoughts, or they would play along for a while until they realized she was actually serious about it, and then they would back off, which you would think is the normal response to that would be just to back off and leave her alone. All but one man would quit talking to Sharon. She met Robert Frederick Glass, who was willing to at least play with the idea of what is called consensual homicide. Consensual homicide is obviously super controversial, and assisted suicide is usually the main topic of conversation around that, but in a way, this case kind of falls under assisted suicide too, I would think. I mean, so what do you think about
assisted suicide?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a fine line, right? So I'm very much pro-choice, right? I'm very much of the mindset that people should be able to do whatever they want within reason. Obviously, you know, there's some extreme cases that no, fuck no, I don't care. Like, you can't do it, right? But I think people who are near the end of their life, terminally ill, people who are, you know, are gonna die anyways, I think if they're ready to go, I think they should have the choice to go. Yeah. As far as consensual homicide from the sexual aspect, or consensual assisted suicide as far as like from a sexual aspect, I don't think I can get behind that, because you're opening that door for anybody at any point to just be like, I'm just going to kill myself because I don't feel like living today. You know, to where tomorrow they could change their mind. So I don't think from an assisted suicide from a sexual standpoint it should be allowed, but I definitely think for like end of the life patients, terminally ill, I think they should have a choice, you know, make it very dignified, you know, they set a date, and that way they get to spend all that time with their family, and then, you know, and then they're given a pill or, you know, something very, you know, humane, and then, you know, then they pass away, you know. So, but from a sexual standpoint, I don't think that's something that should be allowed.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think she needed more mental help than anything, and it's really sad. Robert Frederick Glass lived in Catawba County, North Carolina, and he was a computer analyst for the county, and he held that position for 16 years almost. And while he worked there, he programmed tax rolls and would keep tabs on how much gasoline vehicles were using in the county. He had been married 14 years to his wife Sherry in May of 1996. Robert and his wife had 3 kids together, 2 daughters who were 10 and 7, and a 6-year-old little boy. Sherry started realizing the time Robert spent with her was lessening, but his time spent online was growing. Sherry got suspicious, and she began to sift through his email, discovering really shocking ones. So he was chatting back and forth to others under the names Toyman and Slowhand. The emails were what she called raw, violent, and disturbing. When Sherry found these emails, she called it quits with Richard around May of 1996. During an interview, Sherry said Richard lost his attraction to her, and the final straw was when their children were asking why their dad no longer loved Mommy. So that stung her pretty bad and pushed her over the edge to get out of this marriage. Sherry did confront Richard about the emails at dinner one night, and when she did, his face changed. He became extremely pale. So it suddenly hit her that her own husband had a side to him that she never knew. Richard and Sharon met each other in August of 1996, so the behavior of these two had been going on at least for quite a few months with others before they met in one of those chat rooms. From what I read, Sharon was reportedly the one to reach out to Richard first through email, and she told him that she wanted to be tortured and she had fantasies about being tortured until she died. She was going under the alias of Miranda. So Richard basically told her that he would make that fantasy become a reality for her. So he was, the one guy that agreed to do it. which is what she wanted. So that October, on the 13th, she tells her husband that morning that she's going to go to Georgia to meet some friends. And she left a note for him that said he should not try to find the person that was going to kill her. And, quote, if my body is never retrieved, don't worry, know that I'm at peace.
Even, like, how would you explain that to the police if somebody wanted you to kill them, right? Like, do you get a videotape confession? Do you get something notarized? And then if you get something notarized, how do you explain it to the notary? Oh, it's cool. Like, I'm cool with this. Like, I don't understand how they would go about legally doing that. I mean, obviously it's not legal, but how would you go about doing it in a way that, you know, you don't potentially get in trouble for it? Like, obviously this guy had some kind of sick fantasy about actually killing somebody. And I think she was just that willing participant.
Sharon got in her car and drove 45 minutes to Baltimore's Pennsylvania station. By 8:45 that night, she had arrived in Charlotte, North Carolina by an Amtrak train. Richard picked her up and they went to his mobile home in Lenoir, North Carolina, which is about an hour and a half from Charlotte. When Victor, her husband, found the note that she had left, he immediately went to the police and they began investigating to find out what was going on. Authorities found 6 weeks of emails where Sharon and Robert had been talking, which was around 900 pages of emails. In a lot of these back and forth conversations, Sharon specifically asked Richard Glass to torture her to death. For a few days, the police in Lenoir, North Carolina, watched Richard's home. They never saw a single sign of Sharon at all. There was a search warrant drawn up by a judge, and the police went to Richard's house on October 25th as soon as the warrant was finally issued. When they got inside of the home, they found different items that were Sharon's, along with drug paraphernalia, bondage apparatuses such as leather, straps, wire, rope, wooden frames, knives, skewers, pins, soldering irons, and a .357 Magnum pistol. There were a lot of computer floppy disks, trash, and toys outside of the home, and even child porn magazines. That is horrible.
Child porn magazines? Was it?
Yeah, I mean...
I can't... That's got to be something that he made, or something he got sent to him, because I can't imagine even in the 90s, unless they're talking about, like, a catalog or something, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, what would be a child porn magazine?
Yeah. I don't know. Even when I wrote that, I didn't really think about, like, where does somebody get such a thing? How is that even accessible? So 75 feet away from the trailer, a police officer noticed this little hill of dirt and eventually found Sharon's body buried 2.5 feet in the ground. Looking at her, it wasn't clear what exactly she died of. Investigators couldn't tell that she had actually died from being strangled. After they found all of this, Robert was taken into custody and charged with first-degree murder. He was thrown in the Caldwell County Jail, where he was held without bond. For having the child porn, he was also given extra state and federal charges. D.A. Brown, a county investigator, said there was a vast wooded area behind Richard's trailer, and had he buried her out there, she may have never been discovered at all.
He killed her and then buried her, even though he had permission to kill her.
Yeah.
That's weird.
A few years went by before the trial. On January 27th of 2000, Richard did end up pleading guilty to voluntary manslaughter and the sexual exploitation charges. So I don't know if this part will surprise you, but it did surprise me. He was only sentenced to 36 to 53 months in the Avery Mitchell Correctional Institution. There was an extra 27 months tacked onto that for the federal charges of second-degree minor exploitation, but that still isn't a long time when you add all of that together for murder and child porn. That's not a, a great sentence.
Well, unfortunately, though, at the time, I don't think child porn carried the time that it does now. And what was the charge that he was convicted of?
Second-degree minor exploitation. He pled guilty to voluntary manslaughter.
So what was his sentence again? 36 to how long?
36 to 53 months. That was for the voluntary manslaughter.
Plus 24 months for the child porn.
Yeah, 27 months for second-degree minor exploitation. Right.
So the reason why his sentence was so light or so short, I guess in a sense, was, at least for the manslaughter charge, was because it's manslaughter. It wasn't murder. He didn't get convicted of murdering somebody. He got convicted of manslaughter. Yes, he still killed somebody, but it wasn't all his fault, basically, is what, you know what I mean, what the charge that they went after. And then as far as the exploitation of a minor at the time, I don't think it carried the same amount of time that it does now.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
It is. It really, really is.
Sharon's autopsy was carried out by John Butts, the chief state medical examiner of North Carolina. He reported that the cause of death was strangulation, that it was accidental, and it occurred likely around her third day of being at Richard's place. The police completely disagreed with him about it being an accident. They said the search warrant affidavits detailed Sharon's death and that it was totally deliberate and premeditated. The police said even the emails demonstrated that to be the case. This case was also reportedly the first one ever where the killer was arrested just based on email evidence. While he was serving time, Richard admitted that Sharon had consented to him tying her up with rope and letting him probe her with objects around the house. He also admitted that Sharon permitted him to strap a rope around her neck and pull it as she orgasmed during sex. He said, quote, "I don't know how much I pulled on the rope. I never wanted to kill her, but she ended up dead." His lawyer, Neil Beach, said that the sexual violent play went too far. The medical examiner said that was true, but it's pretty clear what she went there for and what he said he was going to do. So, I guess something that we need to kind of touch on about this, there was no safe word being used at all. Well, at least as far as we know. So what if she didn't use a safe word and he didn't know that he was going too far?
Obviously, consent matters, and having a safe word when you're playing an extreme play like that is important too. But it's also important that you are in tune with that person, with whatever you're doing, right? So if you're choking somebody or you're using, you have to use some kind of common sense. And like when their lips are starting to turn blue and purple, or, their head, it's starting to droop a little bit, like you got to let go. There are signs without a safe word that show you, hey man, you're going too far. So I think part of it is I think he had just as much of a fantasy of killing somebody as she had a fantasy as being killed. And so I think he probably didn't care. But there's a lot of signs that you can pay attention to without needing a safe word. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that is true. I guess I was kind of thinking, like, what if he was behind her as well? Because I think he used a rope. So what if he was behind her using it? But like you said, her head would have probably...
Even if you're behind her, common sense tells you that you're a human being, and if you hold your breath for too long, that, right, you can't breathe. But if you're forcing someone like that, like you're choking somebody with that, I mean, after about a minute, you got to be like, oh shit, I need to let go. Like, at least,
even less than a minute.
Right.
I mean,
even just enough just to let her catch her breath, just to get that gasp of air to be able, so that way she's not going to pass out and die.
Right. So this is actually a good point. The attorney, Neil Beach, believed it to be an accident, but somebody asked him if the death was an accident, why did he then bury her? And his response to that was, if you have a plan for killing someone, you're going to have prior arrangements made for disposing the body. But this wasn't the case, is what he said. But you brought up earlier, should have called the police if it was actually an accident.
Especially like if it was as consensual as he's claiming it to be. Even if, because like you have the consensual, non-consensual, right? That where you even talk about it beforehand, but it's one of those things that it's like an unwritten rule of like, you know, consensually, non-consensually have sex with me.
Right.
And so I feel that if it was a consensual, non-consensual kind of accident or, you know, even on purpose, you still at that point would have to call the police and just be like, hey, you know, we were having rough sex and, you know, she died. With you burying the body, you are at that point turning a completely huge and different spotlight on yourself. You know, that's burying a body does not equal, I mean, it screams guilt. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I guess, though, to play devil's advocate, if he was nervous or scared that he would go to prison, if he called the police and said, you know, this happened, but I swear it was an accident, could somebody freak out and do something that drastic as burying a body out of fear?
Well, of course, we see that a lot in accidents or, you know, dumping a body on the side of the road just because you didn't, you know, kids, you know, drinking too much or partying too much, you know, leaving their friend or not going to the hospital, that kind of thing. I can definitely see that, but it's one of those things that if you had consent beforehand and you guys had already discussed this, you shouldn't have something to freak out about, even though, yes, your adrenaline's going to be rushing like, holy fuck, I just killed somebody.
Yeah.
But I don't, like, if it was truly an accident like he said it was, I don't see why he wouldn't do the right thing and call the police. Burying the body in the backyard, that's saying that I killed them.
Yep, I agree. Once all of the information did come out about Sharon's death, and during the trial, the media focused on how it's super risky to meet people that you've met online. I think a lot of people definitely looked at this case back then and became terrified of possibly meeting anyone they talked to on the internet. Not everyone online is bad, but you also have to take precautions if you do meet people like that. But in this case, I just feel like it was a totally different circumstance because she was going out there knowing her fate instead of meeting someone and not knowing that that's what they would do to her.
It definitely was a different time, though. The internet was new. It was, you know, you really didn't know who you were meeting. I mean, There was a stigma around online dating for a long time. And now one of the biggest apps that people use to meet each other is online. It's a dating app. And, you know, so it's definitely, you know, as far as that, the times have shifted, you know, away from that stigma of dating people online or meeting people online. So if it was like a random person and, you know, like she was just going on a date and she ended up sleeping with him and then he killed her, it's not the same, but you're right. She went out there with the intention of dying. So, I mean, I don't know. It's a rough argument on both sides because at the same time, the prosecutors can argue, and they did successfully, you know, that he killed her on purpose, kind of thing, you know.
Yeah, I just, like I said before, I just think she needed help, and what was going on with Richard's, you know, mental state to agree to kill someone. So they both had issues, and it's kind of like two people with mental issues kind of colliding and just being the perfect storm in a way.
Right, 100%.
So at the same time, anonymity became a hot button of discussion. Censorship activists were arguing that people should not be able to be anonymous online, while anti-censorship activists were fighting against that, saying everybody has a right to be on an open forum without exposing who they are. Basically saying that one bad apple shouldn't spoil the whole bunch.
Well, there's still a huge stigma around BDSM community and bondage and, kinky rough sex. And so, when the internet came around, it kind of connected everybody. That's why I say that I've always thought and believed that the internet is a blessing and a curse. Social media is a wonderful tool, but at the same time, it's also it's a scary place because you really don't know who you're meeting. But I feel like we would have less crimes in this sort of, in this community if there was, the stigma was taken away from it. It's kind of the same thing as sex work, yes, we have gotten to a better place, I feel, especially with sites like OnlyFans, where it's kind of acceptable for people to go, you know what I mean? It's kind of coming out into the light, but I still think that this community is one of the more underrepresented communities within the sexual community,
Yeah, I agree.
So it's hard for people. You can't necessarily, have Sunday dinner and talk about how you enjoy being spanked,
Yeah.
it's not something that you talk about,
Yeah.
Like I was going to say, why do you think it's so taboo to talk about?
What's crazy is so if you think about it over the years, right? So homosexuality was, I'm not equating to it. I have a point to my conversation, but like homosexuality wasn't talked about, right? And you got your ass kicked. It was like shunned on. You could get fucking committed for being gay, male or female.
Right.
Right. And back in the day, if a woman was too horny, right? If she, wanted to fucking, be promiscuous or whatever, she could be committed, right? But yet if a man was the same thing, right? Like promiscuous like a woman was, it wasn't shunned down upon.
They get high fives from the boys.
Because sexuality isn't accepted. It's crazy how much sexuality is shunned, right? So literally we are sexual beings. Like our whole DNA is designed to reproduce, right? So literally we are one of the only species on the planet that has sex for fun besides for reproduction, right? So it's one of those things that there's probably more people out there who like the rough shit who don't say anything, because if they do, then people look down on them. And it's because of bad people like these two that give it a bad name, so then everybody associates it with, BDSM means that you're a fucking...
That you like to be abused, or...
Right. Or that gives, and then that also gives, people the idea that it's okay to abuse somebody who's into BDSM. And it's like, well, that's not how this works, but that's fine. You keep thinking that, and they don't, want to take the time to realize that there's more to it than that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think if more people studied up on it and really took the time to understand what it is and what it shouldn't be, maybe...
Just because you're into BDSM doesn't mean you get to beat the shit out of your partner. Like, that's not what it means. It doesn't mean that you get to be emotionally and physically abusive. Now, are there people within the community that do enjoy to be physically and emotionally abused? Of course there is, but that doesn't mean everybody who's into it is. And that's,
Oh, yeah.
But that's...
And there's so many relationships within that community that aren't even, say, some people are not into spanking and like physical things like that.
Right.
And sometimes that's not even part of their dynamic at all. So there's just so much about it that, I think one of the other things that really kind of put a bad light on things was 50 Shades of Grey. I think.
That
I
really-
respectfully disagree with you.
Okay.
And this is
Okay.
why, because 50 Shades of Grey, okay, women went fucking nuts, right? So 50 Shades of Grey made women's pussies wet everywhere, right? Okay, so why is that? Well, because it's that their deepest fantasies, right? Their secrets, their fantasies that they don't talk about because they're uncomfortable or because they're not comfortable talking to their partners. Okay, fair enough. It's hard for a lot of people to distinguish between the fact of, okay, she wants this, right? She's asking for me to choke her, or she's asking for me to hit her, to the moral compass of, fuck, I shouldn't hit her, which you shouldn't. You should not hit fucking women, right? But in the sense of sexuality, if that's what she's into and she's asking for it, that's where the consent comes from, right? And it's about being open. Now, of course, that goes both ways. Obviously, if a man's not into doing it, then he's just not into doing that. But 50 Shades of Grey, and I know a lot of people within the BDSM community don't agree, but it helped shine a light. You know, it helped bring it to where people can talk about it.
That is true.
You can scroll TikTok, and every 5 TikToks, it's talking about some woman wanting to make her husband choke her. You know what I mean? And it's like,
yeah, right.
That wasn't talked about, you know. But it also comes from, you know, the OnlyFans has helped bring a lot of that light. And even though 50 Shades of Grey is like that commercial bullshit, it still started a conversation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that is a really good thing that came out of it, though, is that it did start the conversation, at least.
Right, because, like, there's a lot of women who want to be spanked or want to be slapped or want to be choked, but they don't know how to say it, right? Because, well, first of all, women's sexuality isn't even, that's taboo in itself. God fucking forbid a woman enjoys sex. And that's not even, like, a feministic viewpoint. That's just the truth. Like, women aren't allowed to enjoy sex. Women aren't allowed to enjoy things. And it's like, well, that's fucking bullshit.
100%. And it's good to hear that from a man, because a lot of other guys you can sit with and talk to about these things like I have, they just don't have that mindset at all. And it is so frustrating.
Well, I don't understand where that closed-mindedness comes from. Like, the reality is like, women are humans just like us, and they have all the same. We're all the same, but we're different, right? Your needs aren't the same as mine, and mine aren't the same as yours. But at the same time, we still have needs, whether it be sex or intimacy. Like, either way, it's still, you know, it's okay either way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, 2 years later, February 20th, 2002, Robert was set to complete the state sentence that he was given in about a month, and he was going to be starting his federal sentence. However, he was found dead in his cell, and his cause of death was a heart attack. Due to this whole tragic situation, psychologists started really digging into this, and they wanted to find out why people have these sexual desires of sadism, masochism, and asphyxia. Sharon's case is also associated with the paraphilia that is called autoassasinophilia. Okay, so that is when someone gets highly aroused and gets off on the thought of being killed. It's noted that everyone that has these thoughts are not going to act on them, of course, but it's just the risk factor that's appealing to some people. This was discovered by the sexologist John Money. He describes it as the sexual arousal of someone who wants to carry out the murder of an unsuspecting sexual partner. So it goes both ways, from the person who wants to carry it out and the person who wants it done to them. Autoassasinophilia is not common at all. So there's not many people that have this, but enough for it to obviously be an issue that they're looking into and trying to kind of study. Another case that comes up is Armin Maz and the consensual cannibalism of Burned Brands. Burned supposedly had this paraphilia and Armin obliged, which was wrong on his part for agreeing to it. So yeah, it's the same concept of, consent and agreeing to it, and then it's kind of on the other person though, because you either go through with it or you just leave them alone. One of Sharon and Victor's neighbors even said, quote, "If anything comes out of this tragedy, it might educate people not to get into this kind of thing." Which I think cases like this are why some people don't understand what real BDSM is, as we were talking about, and some people just have this preconceived idea of what it is, and that it's unsafe or, quote, not normal, and when really what they were doing isn't what BDSM is truly about, and the people that engage in it, or should I say most people, don't want to die. So it's not about that at all. So you got the neighbor saying, "Oh, hopefully this will, educate people not to get into this kind of thing."
And that's kind of ignorant.
Right.
It's ignorance, but what can you do?
Unfortunately, though, everybody's got to be up in everybody's business and not, who gives a shit what they're doing, minus a few things. But the reality is that we're all fucking weird and we all like weird shit. And,
yeah.
Who gives a shit? That's between two people, unless you want to share it with 100 people. Who gives a fuck?
Yeah, I agree.
Sex educator Nancy Ava Miller said, quote, "I don't know what they were doing, but it was not S&M." Okay, you had some people that said Richard was a compassionate man, and others in the community wanted to distance themselves from him completely, but you did have people saying that he was a compassionate man after all of that.
I mean,
it's crazy.
If it was an accident, I mean, yes. But if it was he was actually trying to kill somebody, then obviously not.
Right. There were online groups who were saying, and this, I don't know, you tell me what you think about this sentence. They were saying, quote, "He should have taken her somewhere safer to do her."
I mean, they're not wrong.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, that's super cringe. But they're not wrong, though, for the record.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they should have been somewhere safe. For many people, it was actually a struggle to figure out where they morally stood and what is deemed to be right and wrong under the law. People are kind of
back and forth on it.
Yeah.
On the fence. I think really people don't understand the lifestyle in the community to begin with. I think a lot of people don't understand why they would want to be hit. I mean, yeah, some of it is extreme, but I just don't think they understand it, and instead of educating themselves, they would rather cast them out.
Yeah, and they form opinions. I mean, it's basically so many people with things just forming opinions and not knowing a single thing about the topic they're talking about. So yeah, that is the case of Sharon Lopatka. Thank you so much for joining me today for this episode.
Thanks for having me. This is definitely an interesting one. It took me way back because I remember AOL Instant Messenger from back in the day, right?
Yeah.
Waiting for dial-up. And the websites that would take fucking 8 hours to load before you click it once. Yeah, it took me back. That was a good episode. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And where can everybody find you if they want to keep up with you?
Sure. So you can find the Jury Room Podcast on any major podcasting platform. Wherever you're listening to this, I'm probably on it. If you feel like reaching out to me, you can reach me at juryroompodcast@gmail.com. You can find me on most social media platforms at Jury Room Podcast. And yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. We are also going to be doing an interview that will come out probably in a week or two. And Kevin's going to talk about his show and a series that he's working on that I'm really excited for everybody to hear about. So.
Definitely stay tuned for the interview. It'll be coming out here in the next couple of weeks. I'm definitely excited to share a little bit more about my show and my series that I'm working on that is consuming 99,000,000% of my time. That I think once it's all done, I think it's going to be really good.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you. And until next time, everybody stay safe and take care.